so much, Amrita. Hello, everyone. The topic that I'm going to talk about today evening is a very vast topic, and every small part of this topic can become a talk in itself. Today, I'm going to try to take an overview of the caves in the Western Ghats, the type of rock, why they were built, how long the activity was going on. And I'll try to give you a glimpse of some popular cave sites which are there. This particular area that I'm talking about and the time period that I'm talking about is long, long before India became independent, also much before the idea of India might have existed. Um, so we are looking at a geographical area which was connected via the ports, and so India had an, before the Mauryan period and even after the Mauryan period, that is after the period of Ashoka the Great, approximately around the third century BC. India had the concept of Mahajanapadas. So we did not have an empire, we had kingdoms and kings, which means that the whole of country did not have one religion that they followed, one rule that they followed. Different areas, different ports, different trade routes might have had different rules of their own. Largely these Mahajanapadas, Mahajanapada simply means Maha is a lord, Pada is footfall. Uh, Pada is where the people stay. So Mahajanapada is a kind of word used to talk about urban areas, an area where a lot of people are staying together. And these areas might have developed around the popular trade routes. So India, we have references of trade happening between Indus Valley, Egypt, Mesopotamia, uh, even from the prehistoric time. We are of course talking about a much later time. Uh, we talk a lot about the Vedic period from India, but we don't have a lot of physical artifacts to explain what the Vedas said, their philosophy. We start looking at artifacts approximately from this particular era, which is around second century BC, third century, second century BC, where the artifacts began to be made in stone, a more permanent material. It doesn't mean that we did not have a lot of artifacts before. We surely must have had. Otherwise, we cannot suddenly have a tradition where people are able to carve and the forms are created. But maybe the material which was used earlier was not permanent. It did not mean for the architecture or artifacts to last for a very, very long time. So we do have a few artifacts from terracotta, we have a few stone sculptures, a few metal sculptures, but they are secluded in certain historic sites. So something did change in the 6th century BC. Uh, uh, I would loosely call it as one of the earliest philosophical movements, which is called as Bhakti movement uh, in the later times, where the ideas which were prevalent in the society, the philosophies which were being followed, were questioned. And questioned not in the sense that they were rejected or supported, but a lot of question and answer might have taken place regarding what these philosophies meant, how were they relevant to the modern times, because we already must have had that kind of way of life for around 1,000 years before this happened. And this is the time when we have a lot of different philosophical thought processes emerging in the Indian subcontinent. Um, we have Mimamsaks, we have uh, Sankhyas, we have Ajivaks, we have Buddhist and Jain philosophies coming up. Now, the reason to talk about these is that the earliest cave which is found in India, rock cut cave which is found in India, is in a place called Barabar Hill in Bihar, and which is an Ajivak cave. Ajivak was a philosophy or group which followed a certain kind of way of life. But eventually, the larger group of caves that we find are Buddhist and Jain, And then after a few centuries, we also start having Brahmanical caves. After we have the Lomas Rishi cave in Barabar Hills, we directly have a lot of rock cut cave activity happening in the Western Ghats. You can see a few sites which are there on the map on my screen. These are very few. These are the ones which are in better condition, which are popularly known. But we, like Amrita mentioned, we have hundreds of caves scattered everywhere in these Ghats. So there must have been a reason why people suddenly started coming to this particular area, why people in this area started supporting the ideas of Buddhism. There might have been a reason why they started looking at Buddhism in a new way. The earliest of caves is found in this place called um, Kanheri, and then very close to Lonavala in Pune, we have a cave called Karle. I will be going to the site soon. So before we begin, I would like to talk about what is rock cut. There are two types of structures which are created by man. One is a structure which is built. It is called as structural temple or structural cave. The stupas that you find in Sanchi or Bharuch or Amravati are structural temples. They have been built by cutting blocks and then they have been piled up together by different systems like interlocking system or using some kind of material to stick the blocks together. Parallel to that, and more so, which was popular in India in this particular time period, was rock cut. So, rock cut caves are where you cut the already existing rock. The prerequisite to do this kind of structuring is that you need to have large boulders of rock or you need to have mountain areas. So all the caves that we are going to look at today are not natural caves. The caves have been created and then temple structures, religious structures, vihar, chaityas have been built inside these caves. It is there could be many reasons why this particular area was chosen. So one of the prominent reasons for this to happen today is seen as the trade route. We had two trade routes in ancient India. One was called as the Dakshina Patha, one was called as the Uttara Patha, as you can see here. So this is a projected map which says that it is map of India during the Mahabharat times based on the textual resources. But these particular trade routes seem to have been active almost till the 5th to 6th century, which is up to the Gupta dynasty in India. And as you can see, one is connecting uh, Takshashila to the Gangetic plains, and the Dakshina Patha is connecting the Gangetic plains to the Sahyadri Ghats or the Western Ghats. Now, so there were two trades which were happening. The Takshashila one was by road, connected by road via Central Asia. It must have been trading with Egypt as well as with the West, while as the southern trade route connected to the western coast of India. And it must have largely been trading with the sea routes. So this particular map has been created from the references given by uh, Periplus from Greece, and it might have existed sometime in the first century CE. So you can see here that a lot of trading activity is happening, particularly on the Western Ghats. Now, we are not talking about the spice trade which happened in the Kochi or Muziris. We are going to focus on the Western Ghats predominantly. So we're looking at the Konkan coast up to approximately Goa. Lot of trade must be happening, lot of goods must be coming. They traded in Roman ceramics, they traded in wine. A spice trade was not something which was popular here, but otherwise, a lot of cloth must have been traded from India to the West, from this particular area. A lot of raw material was also being traded. And this is understood as one of the earliest influences for the creation of so many rock cut caves in this particular area. Going back to this map, you can see that Bharut, Surat, Sopara, Mumbai, Chaul, Kuda, these are the port areas, and they are connecting the trade routes, different on-road routes to Dakshinapatha. So Dakshinapatha can must have begun somewhere around Bagh, Maheshwar, or it in the later period it continued up to Paithan or Pratisthana from one of the earliest dynasties, uh, which was Satvahan dynasty. So they, if you look at the caves, they today they seem to be remote. Today we have to travel a lot. We have to climb the ghats. They seem to be complex journeys that we have to undertake. We have to hike a little to reach there. So although they were on the trade route, they are not right on the road. They are not in a place where people could just walk in and they could be visiting. It might not have been crowded. Um, so it was secluded, at the same time, it was very well connected. And it is interesting to note that in these very early days, although the kings who were patronizing the structures, like the Satvahanas of Pratishthan, were patronizing cave structures like Pandavlina in Nasik or the early phase of Ajanta. These kings followed the Brahmanical philosophy, but yet they supported Buddhist and Jain structures, building of Buddhist and Jain structures. So the Brahmanical caves come in much later. We are also talking of the time period when temples had not yet come into existence. So were these were the places where people were gathering or putting in their money. Temples might have been there, but they might not have been in more permanent material. They might have been on a smaller scale, or they might have been built in wood or brick or materials like that. Now, before we begin looking at Buddhist structures, we need to understand why these structures were built. What was the purpose of building this? Now, for almost any way of life in India, uh, be it Buddhism, be it Jainism, or be it Hinduism, we don't really need a structure to go and pray. A lot of our praying or a lot of our rituals can be done locally, can be done at our homes. We can have a small idol of God inside our homes. We can, we can pray to it. So the need to make structures like these was essentially for public worship. So all these structures are essentially public structures. They are made for a larger audience. So was true for the temples later. So we can also see that a lot of inscriptions found in these caves uh, are from multiple people. So there are multiple donors who are putting in money to build these structures. So of course, the king is the one who has initiated the whole structure, but at the same time, you have different merchants, you have couples who are donating. People are donating smaller amounts to larger amounts. Somebody else is taking care of the building, and parallelly, there is development of style and something called as iconography. And they have tried and tested um, the material. So the early caves, which we'll be looking at, you can see that they are still trying to understand what the material is. So sorry. These are just a few names. If anybody is interested in visiting, these are just a few names which are more quite accessible today. Right in the heart of the Ghats, we have Karla, Bhaja, Bhedsa, Kondani. These caves are accessible from Mumbai Pune Expressway around Lonavala. Then we have many cave structures around Pune, around Junnar, like Tulsa Lena, Shivneri, Bhutling, Amba, Ambika, Bhima Shankar Group, Lenyadri. We have Pandulena in near Nasik. Around Nasik, where around the distance of 4 to 5 kilometers, we have Kaneri, Mahakali, Kuda, Bedsa. These are quite accessible from Mumbai. In fact, right in the heart of Mumbai, we have a cave structure called Jogeshwari, which is around 1.5 kilometers from Jogeshwari station. Although the cave is not in a very good condition today, the stone quality was not suitable for exposure, and proximity to saline water has really affected the quality of stone. And then, of course, some cave structures which are very popular, like Ajanta, Ellora, Bhokardan, Aurangabad group of caves. So these are a mixture of Buddhist caves, Brahmanical caves, and Jain caves. Although Brahmanical and Buddhist are the ones which are more dominantly seen in the Western Ghats. I'm refraining from using the word Hindu because the idea of Hinduism, as we understand today, is very different from what was understood as Brahmanical iconography or Brahmanical text in the time that we are looking at. So the time period that I'm referring to is between 2nd century BC to approximately 8th century to 9th century CE. CE is Common Era. So I'm looking at a period of around 10 centuries and different cave structures which were created during this period. Now, who were creating these structures? So, certainly, some skilled artisans would have been there before such kind of massive undertaking uh, was had begun by the king. So, these people must have been masons who were building houses. They must have been painting even before they painted stuck caves like Ajanta, they must have been exposed to some kind of schooling, some kind of art traditions, some idea of aesthetics before they began. And we see references to that in the early caves. We see that wooden carving techniques are being implemented or being imitated in the early caves. So I'm going to begin with Mahakali, which is right in Mumbai. It's a very small structure of caves and unfortunately not very well kept today. Uh, it is not very popularly known. Otherwise, as you can see, this is a photograph which I took some years back. There are some kids who are playing around it. If you go to these caves, you can actually look down and you can see the road highway which connects to the expressway. So even today, most of these caves are very close to state and national highways and are still quite in proximity to the prominent trade routes of India even today. So these roads, Dakshina Patha and Uttara Patha, are the roads which are slightly they have shifted, but they are still very much in use because they are connecting east and west and north and south of the country. So when this cave was begin, sometime in the second, first century before Common Era, as you can see, they did start constructing something that resembles a house. They have, first, some of the columns that you see in the front have been put up by the Archaeological Survey of India so that it doesn't topple down, is well preserved. Now, the rock which you find in Western Ghats is igneous rock. It's basalt. It's decently good quality to carve, but it has a lot of inconsistencies because it has cooled down from molten lava. So there is a surprise element which is always there when somebody is doing a rock cut structure. So when you are making a structure with blocks, you can have control over the quality because the blocks are already there with you before you start building. But there is a surprise element here because you're going to start carving, and there's a probability that the rock formation might not be good enough for you to continue, and you have to abandon the caves. So in many of these sites, you do find that a number of caves are abandoned. You simply you see that half the sculpture is done. There is also a lot of mathematical calculation which must have gone through. So there is a lot of skill and technique which these artisans might have had to develop before they started making these structures because they were carving it out from the front to the back. They were carving the relief in the uh, so they began with, let's say, there's a person who is sitting down. They must have begun with the toe first because that is the thing which is coming the farthest in the front, and then they went into carving behind. So this was a very interesting way of carving. So this particular cave, this is detail of one of the caves, and this site must have been active for many years because you see images of Buddha coming in this site. To give a very brief understanding of Buddhist iconography or any iconography, firstly, let me explain what I mean when I say iconography. Iconography are the icons or visuals, metaphors, similes, you can give them different names, used to denote a certain character from either mythology or history. So these icons are created for visual ease, so that it is convenient for us to narrate a story. So, like in the case of Buddhism, you can identify the image of Buddha because he has long ears, he has a serene smile, he has half closed eyes, he has curly hair, he's wearing this very fine cloth, and there is a posture in which particular posture in which Buddha image is shown sitting or shown standing. So all these factors combine together to become iconography. In case of Hinduism, you can identify Vishnu with a certain weapon that he's holding. You can identify Shiva with a certain weapon that is holding. So all these constitute what we understand as iconic. So Buddhism began sometime in the 6th century, uh, before Common Era, but the earliest image of Buddha is found much later, at least 300 to 400 years after the idea of Buddhism, philosophy of Buddhism became popular. So we can safely assume that nobody who had seen Buddha was alive. So this is an image which has been created out of artist imagination based on observations which must have existed in the textual sources of those times. The On the top of that, Buddhism, Jainism, both did not want people to do idol worship because these philosophies believed that anybody could become Buddha or anybody could attain that state of mind after doing the journey and acquiring knowledge. So the early Buddhist caves, what you can see inside the structure here, they will have stupas. Stupa is a place where the ashes of the monks or ashes of Buddha himself were stored, and it was a place where all the monks or all the people who had begun following or begun believing in the idea of Buddhism gathered together and learned, stayed there, became ascetics, and learned the ideas or learned the philosophy. So the image of Buddha was absolutely not necessary. So when we look at these caves, if we see that the image of Buddha, which you can see behind the boy sitting, is there, it means that the activity began in a very early phase, which is around 2nd century BC and must have continued till 2nd century CE, 2nd century Common Era, when the image of Buddha became popular. So this particular cave site must have been quite popular as a trading route, and that is why people were ready to put in donations, ready to put in money for these structures to be built. Now, like I said, the kings were putting in money because these were prominent trade routes, and these must have been places where the monks who came and stayed could have a secluded life and at the same time could get donations because it was on a trade route, and also walk around to villages and ask for diksha so that they could survive. So Mahakali caves and also Kanheri caves in Mumbai, both in right in Mumbai, were active for 400 to 1000 years because the trade activity was that doing that well that these caves were certainly active for a very long time. The earliest very well defined structure is Karli. When we look at Mahakali caves, you see that they have just built these blocks inside, and in the later period they have carved out the image of Buddha, but it doesn't really have any specific form. But this particular cave, you can see it's a horseshoe shape, which becomes synonymous with Buddhist architectural iconography today, comes up in this place called Karli. Now, where the horseshoe shape has come up from? Um, we don't really have any specific source, but the first cave, Lomas Rishi cave, actually had a semicircular frieze at the facade, but that was carved in wood directly. So what you see here, they are carving it out in stone, but it so closely resembles a wooden structure. You can see closely, they have put in these uh, wooden supports below the ceiling, which are not technically required in a rock cut structure because the ceiling is not going to fall down. You don't need to support the ceiling with beams and columns, but because you see them doing so in the earliest of structures, we realize that they must be imitating wooden structures which might have existed parallel, and they were trying to create structures which were very similar. The horseshoe shape also might have come from the same inspiration. So you see some very interesting things which come in because of wooden influences, like the jali work that you see at the top also seems to be inspired from wooden structures which existed before. This particular type of rock cut cave is called as Chaitya Gruha. Any structure which has a stoop inside, the block of spherical block inside, like I told you before, is called as a stupa. The stupa is where the ashes of the monks or Buddha are stored. There are two types of stupas. One is a Sharira stup, one is a Asharira stup. Sharira is where the ashes are there. Asharira is where it's just a representation. You don't actually have the ashes inside. It just represents a mock. I realize that I'm throwing a lot of words at you. You might remember a few, you might skip over a few, but it is good to know some terminology. So this stupa is cut out of rock. So it is solid rock. It is not that it is stuck. It is carried and stuck inside. It was planned when the cave began to be carved. So the carving of cave begins from the front to the back. They must be cutting out chunks of rock, chiseling out chunks of rock, and they might be pushing them out. So there is a sense of planning, very strong sense of planning that they must be having. The shape is upside, and because it is not possible to put something inside a solid boulder of rock, this is certainly a Oshari Rastu. But what is fascinating about Karli is that you actually have some remnants of the wood from the first century, like in the Chhatri here. And Uh, so they were imitating the wooden structure. They were also using wood in these early caves because they must be trying to understand how is it that they should come up with a way of building the structure, uh, which tells us about what kind of inspirations they must be having. So the artisans were certainly quite well informed about their contemporary architectural planning. Now, who were these artists who were building these caves? Um, Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of names. We do have, in these early structures, we have names of a lot of donors. We have inscriptions talking about how much money is given by whom. We have inscriptions about how many monks were there. We have inscriptions about who should be looking after the monks, who should be paying for the cleaning. Such kind of inscriptions are there in the Nasik caves, where the king has asked the village next door to take care of the clothing necessities of the monks, but we don't have names of a lot of artists in these early times. But considering that this activity was happening in so many places, this must have been a group of artists. There is one interesting group which has been identified by Dr. Deepa Kandal and Dr. Jairam Poduwal. It's called as Utpatti Pidagu, which came from Andhra. And this group left insignias in some places like Bhukardan, some cave structures in Andhra Pradesh. So we from these studies we come to know that there were guilds, groups of people which might have had one architect, which might have had one a group of sculptors. We had a group of painters, skilled labor, and they traveled from one place to another making these caves. And that could be the reason why we have stylistic continuation happening in these cave structures. It is not merely imitation, but somebody who worked on Karli was also invited to build something in Bhaje. The knowledge was passed on from one generation to another, and eventually it was documented in text called as Shilpa Shastra. But the texts are written in Sanskrit, most probably written by observations and not by people who were really building these structures. So these people are doing something which is very ambitious, like building such a huge uh, cave. This is the detail where you can see the wooden chhatri here. So if anybody has seen the Sanchi or the Barhut stoop, you must have seen a structural stoop where you can actually walk around this particular Pradakshina Patha or the circumambulatory path. The under or the semicircle at the top represents the world, and you can go around it, and then you can ultimately go to the heaven. The upper part is represents the seven heavens, and ultimately you can cross all the heavens by overcoming your desires and gain salvation or mukti. Now, right inside the cave at the top, you have these figurines. There are inscriptions below many of these figurines, and although they are not realistic like portraiture. From the inscriptions, we know that these are images of the people who have donated money for the building of these caves. Particularly in this area, above these couples, you have inscriptions in Pali, which talk about people who have what kind of amount has been given. You can also see that they are bowing down to the deity inside. Uh, Even here, we realize that this cave must have been active on the active trading route for many years, because it begins with the early phase of Buddhism and continues till the image of Buddha comes into existence. This is a very this particular image is from Kanheri. These group of caves are there right bang in middle of the Borivali National Park, and they have a lot of caves. This structure has been uniquely active for around 1000 years, and that is why we see all stylistic different variations of Buddhist iconography coming in one side. So, what I'm showing you here is a painting done by company school artist in the uh, mid 19th century of the Kanheri caves. It's a watercolor on-site painting. Today, of course, the caves look very different. Even here, you will find that they are yet continuing their imitation of wooden carving techniques. But so this is a very early phase of Kanheri. Then eventually you have them going into more complex structures. And this is how it looks like today. So each side that I'm showing you is chronologically moving ahead. And you can see that there is slight variation in what is uh, being done. The details are improving. The artisans are understanding the stone better. The material understanding is improving, and that is why they can do more and more intricate work within the same material. Now, there are, like I said, there are some fascinating insights that we get when we uh, try to look at these caves with the understanding that this was an imitation of wooden structures. So the columns, you might have observed the columns earlier too. This site is called Pandavleni. It's in Nasik. look closely at these columns, you will see that the lower part of these columns resembles pots of mud, terracotta pots that we use even today. And this was something which was seen at Karle, Bhaje. It is also seen at Kaneri. So what is the reason that you have these pots? What logic? What logic does it have? Because we have established that these columns were anyways not supporting the ceiling because these have been built right in the mountains. So the columns are not a structural necessity. So after many years, uh, the art historians have understood that this is again another imitation of wooden structuring. If anybody has these old beds in your traditional homes, you must have observed that so that the wood does not get termite infected, small pots are put below the legs of the cupboards or the beds full of oil so that the oil seeps in the wood and it stays stronger, termite free or infection free. So that particular uh, visual was imitated exactly in these early structures, and eventually it becomes a style. So as we move ahead in caves, these spots start becoming more stylistic, more elaborate, more fancier, and they continue to be part of the structure of the column in decorative form till the medieval times. But the pot, of course, changes places. It might go in the center of the column, it might go at the top of the column. Yeah. So right here, you will find that when we go to the cave, which is a little later in time, the pot has become inverted and it has gone at the top of the column. It has become a style now. So this is a very fascinating cave. When you look at the structure, it is right on Bombay Agra Highway, National Highway, and when these caves are at the top of the mountain. When you look at them from the road, especially during the winters and monsoons, it feels like the caves are flying in the sky, and that is what the artisans might have visualized. So, in the lower part of the cave, you have these people who are carrying it on their back. If you look closely, you will see that each of them is holding a small uh, beam on their shoulder. Uh, the wings have unfortunately faded with time, but in the early images, you see that each of these characters have wings. So it is almost like they are flying in the sky with this cave. We look at Bhaje. So after the style of the caves is established in the Western Ghats, now you have the horseshoe shape, which is almost fixed. You have the jali work, which they have understood very well how to create it. They have also understood the material. They now start bringing in more complex iconography. Now you start having images like these. So, although these have not been surely identified because this could be Surya, this could be Indra, some people identify it as Mandata. But you can see that the figure on the right side is mounted on an elephant. The one on the left is mounted on a chariot of many horses and almost sitting on somebody very huge, carved like a cloud. Like it is almost a cloud personified. And in Buddhism, we quite often see Buddha in many Jataka tales that Buddha or Bodhisattva is arguing with Indra, who was a significant deity in the Rigvedic times. So now you have start having these complex iconographies. These tell us that the Western caves, this area was now even more popular in trade. So it is not limited only to the monks, but many people are visiting, even people from outside uh, the kingdom are visiting, and that is why they need to tell more stories. The propagation of religion, propagation of ideas, propagation of the patron is now necessary. In the earlier case, we saw that all the couples look almost same. So it was largely for the patrons. But now, as we move ahead, you will observe that it is being done for the good of larger population. The detail, this will also show you the stone quality. You can see that the elephant is uprooting a tree and people are running away. So element of terror, element, there's a lot of drama which is now coming in beyond just a very stationary image of Buddha, which we see in the earlier caves. First, it's fascinating to see Ajanta group of caves. Ajanta group of caves were suddenly abandoned. The caves that we are looking at, we have looked at, were used part of the trade routes and were patronized by different dynasties for a very long time. Now, it is also interesting to note that the dynasties have changed. We have Satavahanas, then we have Kshatrapas, then we have Vakataks, we have Guptas, we have so many different dynasties locally and nationally, but the same site has continued to exist. It tells us that these sites were not significantly part of the power structure. They were governed by the local uh, traders or the trade routes, merchants more than the kings and the kingdom, kings and the emperors. Because of which these sites have continued to exist even when the dynasties have changed. Ajanta is a different site in that context because Ajanta began with Sahatwanas in the second century, must have been active till the end of 5th century. The dates are quite disputed amongst the scholars, but it was suddenly abandoned. It simply stopped existing as it has 29 caves, and it was found by this English officer whose name was John Smith. The image that I'm showing you is the place from where John Smith first realized that some kind of structure existed. This is from the viewpoint. Now you can see that it is secluded. At the same time, it is connected via a trade route. It is connected to this ghat called Kannada Ghat, which is a very popular trade route connecting Karnataka and Maharashtra together. So Ajanta group of caves are all Buddhist. It is not possible for me to talk about each and every cave, but I'll be showing you some examples. When you look at this facade, it is very obviously different, much more elaborate than what we have seen before. It is a much ambitious project. We can see that the craftsmanship is so much more refined than what we saw earlier. We also see that the iconography is refined. The image of Buddha is very specifically created. All the Buddhas look very much alike. There is a lot of decoration that is coming up on the columns. Although the imitation of early wood architecture has now become a style. That is why you see the beams and columns as it is. But they have understood the material, the basalt rock very well now. So you see a lot of details coming in. So what you see, these white lines that you see are the inconsistencies in rock. So in Ajanta itself, you have some caves which have just been left because the stone was not good in quality. The stupas also now become very elaborate with image of Buddha coming on it. It is possible that the stup existed like the one in Karli. And the dynasty which came later now wanted to make it more detailed, more accessorized, elaborate, and that is why they have carved a niche in the stupa and created the image of Buddha inside it. Now, these particular structures are called vihar. They are there in almost all the structures. Vihar is a place where to stay. These are small rooms. These might have been created for monks who were staying there, who learned from the head monk of this particular group of caves. Now, as I said, Janta must have been a very important trade route, very important point where a lot of trade routes connected. Vakatakas were a dynasty coming from Vidarbha area, from central India. and they must have created this particular site in the near the Dakshina Patha to mark their prominence. And that is why for them to go larger in scale might have been important to talk about their power. And that is why you have very huge structures, you have very different kind of imageries of Buddha coming in. This particular sculpture is the Mahaparinirvana of Buddha, or the passing of Buddha. You can see people mourning below, while Buddha is very comfortable because he was already aware that he's going to die. You can see a smile on his face. In the same cave, this is cave number 29 from Ajanta, you have another fascinating depiction. This is called as Mara Pralobhana. This is Buddha right in the center, sitting below the Bodhi tree. And in the lower part, you can see these beautiful women who are dancing, who are carrying trays of food, wine. At the top, you can see demonic characters who are attacking Buddha. But Buddha has overcome all the temptations and finally has uh, reached salvation. Now, what another element which you see happening here is that you will observe that there is this elephant who is approaching from the left side, and a dejected army or a lost army is leaving and going outside the relief on the right side. So this particular character, his name is Mara, and he represents Kamadev in Buddhist mythology. He represents desires, and it's not just sexual desires; it is all forms of desires because of which you have food, drink, pleasure, luxury, everything represented in human forms below. And he is defeated and he's leaving. So the idea of same image being repeated like a narrative comic strip can be seen here at Ajanta. It is especially seen in many of the paintings. Fascinating imagery are seeing a lot from Ajanta onwards, which becomes popular in the Western Ghats and eventually in many parts of India, is the inclusion of Nagas. You can see the Naga king and queen very majestically sitting here. You have this Naga in Jainism behind Parshvanath. You have a Naga in Shaivite iconography. Shiva has a Nag around his neck. You have Vishnu sleeping on Naga. And you also have this Naga image in many Jataka stories. So the Naga actually represents people who were not part of any mainstream philosophy and might be associated with people who were living in these Western Ghats. The localites who converted into Buddhist, Jain, Brahmanical sects, and to become inclusive, they suddenly start becoming part of the iconography. This is something very fascinating that you see in Ajanta. So Ajanta has a lot of paintings which are in good condition because Ajanta was abandoned. The other sites also must have had a lot of paintings which are not existent today. And these stories largely talk about moralities, they talk about some a paramita or a task, a good thing that should be completed. It talks about not being greedy, it talks about overcoming your temptations and desires. And it is fascinating to note that many of them are talking about trading, trade routes, trading, merchants, the problems they face. Like this particular Jatak is called Vanara Jatak. Um, it is a little difficult to see, but I'll try to explain one of the stories as an example. Here at the Here you will see that a man is having a conversation with a monkey, and you will see a little white mass in front of the monkey. So the monkey has killed a rabbit, and this man is wandering the jungle for a very long time. And he is hungry, so he comes to the monkey and requests the monkey to share some food. The monkey is fine with sharing, so he decides that he can give some to the man. But the man becomes very greedy and he thinks in his head that what if I eat kill the monkey? I'll have food to go on for much longer. Now, right next to it, you will find that the man has tried to pounce on the monkey, but he has fallen down. Now, this part is a little damaged, but the monkey here, if you can see partial part of the monkey is leaning down and looking at the man who has fallen. He climbs down, and right next to him, you have the monkey who has mounted the man on his back and he is bringing the man back again. So it is a the monkey is very good-hearted because he saved the person who tried to kill him. But the story also tells us the moral that you shouldn't be greedy. You shouldn't try to acquire more than you need. So each of these stories depict certain things, and this is a story technique which develops in this particular area and has continued to be part of narrative techniques in other parts of India too, where there's a common background and the story is narrated by repetition of the same characters. Like in this case, the story of Chadanta Jataka. This is an example of the abandoned cave. You can see that the stone at the top is not as good as they expected, and that is why they have abandoned the ceiling as it is. There is no sculpture in the cave, and they have moved to the next cave, and they have created a more elaborate cave later. This site is again very close to Ajanta. Most of these sites, if you are a person who treks, you can actually go very quickly from one side to another. They are connected via the mountain ranges. Today, because we travel by road, we have to take the rounds of the ghats and go to these caves. This is very close to Ajanta, a Buddhist site. Again, it is called Pitalkhora. The name comes because the stone is glazes like yellow. So Pitta is a metal, bronze, and Khora is the stone. It's a very fascinating structure. Unfortunately, the stone quality was such that the site is quite damaged compared to Ajanta. Now, this site is special because we find a very elaborate uh, water storage system uh, in place in a site of 6th century. So these rooms, these are broken, so we can see the inside of the vihara. You can see that they have a small um, niche in the wall, maybe to store things. Then you have a bed which has been carved out. But as you can see, the top part of the cave, the ceiling is not, the stone is not very fine, and that is why it has broken down. So this is entry to one of the vihars, and while you climb up to the left hand, you see these pipelines carved out inside the stone wall. These are all rock cut, they are not structured, and they connect to a cistern which is there at the top. So you can see very elaborate pipelines which are carved here. And they connect to a cistern and they have a very efficient water system, which so this makes Pitalkhora very special. It is possible that other sites also had this, although we don't see it visibly today. So I'm going to my final site for this session, which is Ellora. Although, like I said, a lot can be spoken about Western Ghats, a lot can be spoken about each of the sites. I again begin with some very early watercolor representations done during the company school. Ellora is a very interesting site because it was active from the end of 5th century, beginning of 6th century to almost the 9th century. And it has Buddhist caves, it has Brahmanical rock cut caves, and it has Jain rock cut caves. So all the three sects are represented here. The first 12 are Buddhist. Then you have from 14 to 29 we have Brahmanical, and 30 to 34 we have Jain caves. I will be giving you a glimpse of all quickly. So, like Ajanta, Ellora has a very fine quality stone. And the Utpatti Pidgu guild, which I spoke about, we have references of Utpatti Pidgus creating a few of the sculptures here stylistically. So these are the early Buddhist caves. The top of the fringe outside has inscriptions as well as the donor couples, but you can see that the donors have become smaller in size compared to Carly. This is a large hall. Some some scholars assume this to be a dining hall. Some scholars assume this to be a monastery. But such kind of large halls are present in Kanjuri as well as Ellora. And then you have, I'm jumping to cave number 15, which was patronized by this Rashtrakuta king whose name is Danti Durga. We have a beautiful inscription in front of this monolith. A monolith means something carved out of mono or a single rock. So, Rashtrakutas were fought a very important war on the Western Front, and they were gifted the land of Ellora by the Chalukyans of Badami or Karnataka. The Rashtrakutas are the ones who begin the activity of representing Vishnu and Shiva imageries, and they are much grander in scale. Um, the niches are very deep, and now you can see that along with the trading routes are also becoming more and more prominent points to showcase power. So the caves are now not just caves, they are not just places for monks, they are not just religious places, but they are now becoming places to show dominance and significance of a particular dynasty. Now, the caves in Ellora are simultaneously being created along with temple building activity. And that is why you now have a different kind of style which emerges. The image that you're looking at is Narsimha killing Hiranyakashipu. Then you have the Vaman avatar of Vishnu, or the where he has encompassed the universe with three steps. In the left side lower corner, you will see a character with wings who is Garuda, who is holding down Bali. A lot of things have been are brought together here by the sculptor. Then you have Shiva killing Rakta Bijantaka, Kali in the lower part, um, drinking the blood in a bowl you see in the hand of this character below. Because the demon had a boon that wherever a drop of his blood falls down, another Raktabijantaka will be created. So she doesn't let the drop of blood fall down. She drinks the blood. That is how he kills her. As we move to Ellora, you see that the guilds are very well established, and the stories are established, the iconography is set, and the whole project is much larger in scale. The magnum opus or the most fascinating structures in rock cut architecture of Western Ghats is Kailashnath of Ellora. Because this particular temple, it looks like a structural temple, but it is carved out of monolith. So it is fascinating skill-wise. This temple is understood as imitation is not a very appropriate word, but inspired by Virupaksha temple built by the Chalukyans at a place called Patatakkal in Karnataka. And it was visualized from top to bottom. So it began from the top, it was carved to the lower part, and as you can see, the idea of temple has already been established. That is why it is easy for them to create a rock cut structure out as a copy of structural temple. The very elaborate temple, two-storied. The two stories mostly have are two-storied because they began carving from the top. Then they must have realized that they need to go even deeper, and then they have another floor. On the two sides, you have Mahabharat, Ramayana stories carved out. What you can see here. So here you will, if you can observe, there is this 10-headed character in the second last frieze, which is Ravan. This temple was repainted during the time of Ahilyabai Holkar, and that is why the paint looks quite new. And this is like a very nice place where you can go and study Hindu iconography. You have Vishnu on the right, you have Mahishasuramardini uh, sitting on the lion, killing the Mahisha. So you have lot of sculptures carved in detail. One of the most fascinating sculptures of this site is Ravan shaking Kailas. You can see Ravan lower, almost three-dimensional. Imagine that this is a single boulder from which the artists have fashioned out these details. So Ravan, with his meditation, has physically shaken Kailash, and Shiva is sitting at the top, and Parvati is afraid, and she is tugging Shiva's arm because she's scared of what might happen. So this is, of course, the story is a metaphor to the idea that his meditation was very aggressive. In the later caves, you have lot of iconography. Like this is Shiva in his Natraj form. You have Shiva and Parvati playing dice or chopper, as you can see here. Then you have a very beautiful image of Bhairava and Kali, Mahakal, the same cave. And the last caves here are Jain caves, which I am showing you right now. Um, to come to an end, we spoke about the pot and where it came from, and by the 9th century, this is where the image of pot has reached with the evolution of style in the rock cut caves of Western Ghats. Yeah, I'll stop here. Amrita Sukhi.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much. Your knowledge in Snehal is so deep and wide in the subject that it feels that one session is probably not going to be enough to get, like you started by saying that, you know, each of these are sort of talks in themselves. But thank you sort of breadth of information to us. And of course, we have um, viewers saying the same thing, and you know, people have admired and sort of complimented you on your talk. So thank you. Specific characteristic features that they were looking at when they chose these sites for the Buddhist caves, sacred caves.
Um, like I said, most of these mountain ranges connect to the trading routes. So it is very geographically site specific in nature. And what is seen in India is that because we have kingdoms and we don't have a central common canon of creating, we generally don't have people transporting the raw material from one place to another. So the idea of choosing material is very localized, and the creators are also localized. So we generally have people using the existing material.
So they were
So
looking for where resources and material and people were available to do the work for them.
yes.
Chaitali wants to know if the construction of the entry of caves was on a sunlight basis with an east-west direction.
Not every cave in the Western Ghat is so. but most of the caves do have very good light during the summer solstice and winter solstice. But as you can see, many sites are uh,
Circular.
semicircular, so not every side is east-west, but that is better possible when it comes to structural temples. We already have the mountains. We are just using them. So
So, Chaitari was again looking at some pillars and saying how the colors of the pillar was brownish and it was different from the walls of the Nashik caves. You can throw some light on that?
so yes, so like I said, the caves have been active for many years, and you have to remember that rock is a living organic material, and it changes with exposure to atmosphere. So, if a certain stone is carved and it is more exposed to the atmosphere, sometimes the color changes. In these particular Western Ghats, it is igneous rock. So, you already must have observed the change in stone color in the sites that I've shown, although they are of the same mountain ranges. So, that is the quality of the stone that we are looking at.
Yogesh says that your in-depth knowledge of the topic is totally worth appreciation, and we second that.
Thank you so much.
Naveen says, where else do you mentioned that there's a visual of Buddha arguing with Indra, and he wants to know where else you can see something like that, Buddha arguing with Indra or any other Vedic god.
Um, The image of Indra is there in one of the uh, plaques at Barhut.
Okay.
Um, so you might be able to locate it in some of the history books, not that it is very easily available. But, but it is assumed that Indra is part of it because Indra is shown to be, as you saw in the relief, he was very aggressive. He was trampling over people. So he is generally shown as this egoistic person, and Buddha, with his calmness, is able to quieten him. So it's more in stories than in visuals. Okay? Half broken reliefs. Yeah.
Okay. Bhagyashri would like to know whether water management was also important while selecting these cave sites. Did they always depend on natural water sources, or was there any other strategy for water storage?
Um, Generally, most of the sites have been around water sources, springs or small rivulets, and that's true for everywhere in India, not just the Western Ghats. But in you also have water storage systems like small cisterns which were built. Uh, of course, these caves might not have been occupied throughout the year.
Hmm.
They might have been more populated in certain times of the year and must not have been occupied otherwise. But they do have cisterns in most of the cave sites. And in Karnataka, they actually have taken care that they have created man-made reservoirs and lakes and have built cave sites next to them. Maharashtra, we didn't need to. We did have a lot of natural resources.
Hmm. Mahesh says, good informative session. Lata also says it's a great insight into the caves and delivered well. So does Naveen. There is a question from Sabira as to what was the relationship between the monks and the trade? Were they involved in it?
Uh, the So what we see from the inscriptions is that a lot of merchants converted into Buddhism and Jainism. And the early period when Buddhism was being propagated or being told about, they certainly needed patronage to talk about what Buddhism was. So the merchants donated money to build these sites close to trading routes, and the monks who lived on Bhiksha came and lived there, not that the monks were personally part of any trade.
Pradosh wants to know why did the cave temples prosper mostly in the Western Ghats? We have 7, 8 major sites in Maharashtra, he says, but very limited in other parts of the country.
Unfortunately, that's not very true. Um, but like yes, so a lot of trade was happening on the Konkan coast, but we do have a lot of sites on the eastern coast as well. They are just not that popular. Uh, uh, yes, but yes, the availability of stone as a material in the Western Ghats in itself is one of the prominent reasons why we have so many sites. There might have been sites in more less permanent materials, but we have a lot of Pallav caves in Tamil Nadu on the eastern coast as well.
Oh, but they're less talked about, so I guess
Then
we.
let's talk. They might not have had donors who were putting in that kind of money. The scale is little smaller. The quality of stone also matters. Like in the Western Ghats, the stone is very comparatively hard to Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. So, if you want to create a detailed sculpture, you need to scale it up so that you can carve an eye or a nose to chisel.
Hmm.
Whereas if you go to a place like Halebedu, let's say, it's a soapstone, so you can achieve the same result in a very small scale.
Yeah.
So then the scale automatically changes.
Bhagyashree has a question. What scope do these sites hold beyond just being tourist sites? Means with respect of live heritage Buddhist sites.
Okay, they I would not call them tourist sites, but yes, today it is difficult to look at these Buddhist sites to understand the contemporary Buddhist philosophy. Because Buddhism changed over the period of time. Buddhism wanted things to change. They have a concept called Sangiti, where they wanted people to meet after every 100 years and relook at what Buddhism philosophy said and change it according to the contemporary times. A very unique and a very modern idea of looking at religion. And that is why we see shifts in Buddhism happening at regular time intervals. So,
Hmm.
in a way, you shouldn't be looking at these sites as a precedence, but it is a good place to understand early Buddhism and when it was a philosophy and not a religion.
Hmm.
I could say that.
Adi wants to know, and I don't understand this question. How has cave so I don't know if it is how has cave architecture influenced temple architecture or is it the other way around? But I think it is how has cave architecture influenced the temple architecture?
Um, it's not that it has directly influenced, but there are parallels. So where you don't have a lot of ranges, people have started building structures. But
Hmm.
from the stylistic observations, we can see that the same artisans have worked on early temples. So certainly, their understanding of material has been very helpful in the building of early temples. But the structuring of the temples is hardly possible by understanding how you cut the rock. It
Correct.
is an independent discipline in itself.
Adil asks, so where the stupas were carved in stone inside the rock carved cut caves, there weren't any relics or funerary artifacts stored inside them, right? Because that's what you said, that.
Yes, because they would have had to break the rock in order to do that. But it's easy to do it in a structural stoop. So you can like, put it inside, walk down.
Adil has a comment that Odisha also has rock cut caves like Khandagiri and Udaigiri.
Khandagiri and Udaigiri, yes, absolutely.
Other than that, everyone else has said that the session is very informative and Thank you for such an intriguing and interesting talk. And we'd say the same. Thank you so much for joining us for the first talk of the year. And we start on a very good note with such an informative talk. Thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you very much for participating this Saturday evening. And we look forward to having you all here next time as well. Thank you so much, Snehal, for this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.